Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay and welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. This is episode 20. I'm interviewing Pierre Grage and his new book, Inside VFX. Check it out.
Welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. Allan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Allan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Allan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on allanmckay.com.
Okay guys, so I hope you're having a good week. One thing I want to bring up right away is that this is going to be the new official time that every week, Monday 6 a.m. Pacific time, so LA time, is when I will be releasing episodes of the podcast. Over Christmas, I was firing out rapid fire, 2, 3, 4 a week. It was insane, and that was to do with trying to get us prepared as quickly as we can for 2015. So I was dropping a lot of information leading up to the new year, so everyone can kind of have a big amount of information to bite on over that time. So Monday 6 a.m. PST is when I'll be putting out new episodes. So check back every Monday for new episodes, and I have a lot of really amazing ones coming up. At the same time, other things are production quality. It's going to get a huge step up there as well. And also, I will be doing in-depth show notes too. So this episode, for instance, you can go to http://www.allanmckay.com/20 for episode 20. And that will have a lot of information, links to everything we discuss, as well as other cool stuff there too. So make sure to check that out. And in the meantime, this episode is a really cool one. There is a book that came out very shortly ago, like not more than a few weeks ago, called Inside VFX. Now, this book covered a bit of a controversial subject, and probably one that you'll notice I don't typically cover. I've always kind of stepped away a little bit from the whole industry in terms of any instability that may be going on, because I know there is a lot of websites and a lot of places out there that are kind of throwing up their hands and saying we're all doomed, things are really bad right now, and we're totally screwed. And I don't believe that at all. Personally, I think that things are changing, and it's not the first time that they've changed. I do think that we need to embrace change and also think more strategically, and that's why I always stress that I think it's so beneficial to all of you to be able to think more business-like, to actually start to think more strategically about how you want to do your work, to start to think about the big picture and think a bit more dynamically about that. So I definitely always say that it's very important to have a bit more of a business mind when you're going into this industry or anything really. So that being said, I tend to keep away from very specific subjects like this because I think it's very easy for us to all say that things are bad and to really focus on that as a big scare tactic. And I do think that there's a lot of that out there, and the big thing about it is that there isn't much behind it other than talking about all the negativity around it. Now, this book, Inside VFX, came out a couple weeks ago, and instantly I ran out to get it. I could not wait to get my hands on this book because for once, rather than approaching it from the perspective of things are bad, it actually was more about the history of VFX, bring up a lot of case studies as to why things are bad. It's a lot more analytical and educational in terms of how things work in the VFX business, as well as Hollywood in general. And I think that this is a really necessary read for anyone if they want to understand a bit more about this business, especially starting out too. And the reason is not to scare you away. It's more to understand how it all functions, so that way you can begin to think for yourself and to more prepare yourself in terms of having your own strategy, having your own opinions, and being able to adapt to this ever-growing industry. So I think it's a fantastic read, but either way, I definitely think this is a great episode. It's very insightful, and I think that it's been really great to talk to Pierre, who has spent 4 years writing this book and doing a lot of research. Obviously, he's come from a long background working on movies like Avatar, Day the Earth Stood Still, lots of other great films, Weta, ILM, lots of different people. So he's got a vast amount of experience on this subject as well as being in the industry. And I think this has just been a really fantastic episode to jump into. So all of that being said, let's dive into this episode now and keep an open mind, but I would love to hear what you guys think at the end of this. So when you get a chance, check out the show notes for more information about this, as well as links to everything we discuss in the episode. And I'm going to read everyone's comments, and I'd love to interact myself. So that being said, let's dive in. Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay. I'm here with Pierre Grage, and Pierre started out in Germany and has a vast amount of experience working all over the world for studios such as ILM, Animal Logic, Weta VFX, Double Negative, and dozens of others, as well as releasing a really fundamental book that I loved reading, Inside VFX.
Sure, and thank you for having me.
I guess if you want, we can just dive into the hard questions. I mean, what was the first project that you started out on?
Yeah, well, I have to say I started my first project was actually a gaming project because I just, I had not much experience in 3D. I just, educated myself at home, and I've just played around with 3D Max actually. And then, that was around 2000, and there wasn't just much supply of visual effects artists, or in this case 3D artists. So, and I just cold called a company, a gaming company in Eutin, and they were very open for to kind of meet me, and they took me on board, and they were very open-minded about just educating me at first. And
cool.
They actually had the first Maya Master. Do you remember the Maya Master program?
Yeah. I'm a Autodesk master as well. So
oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So I had in that company I worked with Dirk Bierlo, who was one of the first Maya masters, and he taught me so much about Maya. And then they threw me pretty much in the first game project, which was Pizza Connection, or other. I think the English name was Pizza Tycoon.
Okay.
You probably heard about it and played it every day. So yeah, and I actually worked on the first explosion in that. So and that's kind of when I kind of found out that I really like to blow up stuff, and then the company kind of dismantled. They didn't have the commercial success that everybody was hoping for, but that didn't really matter because there was another company opening at that time. I mean, it did matter. It was a pretty rough time, but the job offer was on the table right there, because the whole industry was booming around 2000, and there was the first full CG feature in Germany in production, and they interviewed me, and they hired me right away.
That's awesome. And so initially, just starting out, you just called the studio and said hey, I want to go work for your company, hire me, and
yes,
that's cool.
I just looked them up, and I mean, obviously I kind of looked what kind of work they were doing, and I saw that they were jumping on 3D, and I was just researching the stuff on my own. I write about it in the book. I kind of played around with my own games. So because I couldn't really draw, so I kind of had to make graphics with the computer. And so yeah, it just made sense to give them a cold call, and I asked for an internship. And by the way, that internship was paid. Back in the day, around the 2000, there was no such thing as a free internship. And they offered me a very fair deal, and yeah, it would be stupid not to do it. And the only thing was, if I think the only condition was if you suck after 6 months, that's it.
Still, that's 6 months, so it's a bit of time to get in there and learn. But that's really cool.
It was awesome. Yeah, they gave me a book and the Maya Master, Dirk.
Yeah, that's cool. I still remember back then too. It's when you buy Maya, Softimage, or even Max, you get Softimage was the worst because you get an entire bookcase, the boxes it comes in work as a bookcase as well, and there's 6 or 7 books, thick books with all the information in it, and it's always intimidating because it's okay, time to pick this stuff up,
Yeah.
It can be pretty.
And there were no at least the online material that was out there back in the days that it just plain sucked. So yeah, if you just had to buy a book and you rely completely. I think that's the main thing that's very different today. You can go online and you find awesome course materials. I mean, digital tutors, for example, is amazing.
Yeah.
I think. especially if you start out.
No, I love it. Like, I think that's a really one thing I love so much about this industry now is the fact that we do have such a vast amount of training content out there. And
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
kind of jealous because, like, for me and you, initially, for me, I actually bought like a book, and that because I didn't have internet, I didn't have anything, and so I bought Inside 3 Studio Max from Inside 3ds DOS from New Writers Publishing, and it would have like a bunch of architectural renderings and discuss like what these buttons do, and that's pretty much all you have to start out. And now suddenly you Google anything, 1,000 YouTube videos will come up, and you've got all these intuitive tools like ZBrush.
Exactly.
It's just I kind of hate it because you're on CG Talk and there's people who are like, yeah, this is like 6 months in and they're doing amazing work, and you're like,
Yeah.
you should have seen my work at 6 months. It was
Oh yeah, I mean, you should have seen the stuff I applied with at the company. It's still a miracle that they hired me, or that they actually gave me that internship, because it was just it was the typical animation. And they start doing, I mean, at least back in the days when they start doing 3D, it was a planet and a spaceship, and the planet explodes.
that's awesome.
And it flies away.
I was talking to one of the exec producers at Activision, like, guys, 20 years ago or something. I just said, like, do you have any advice? Because I think I was like 14, and I said, somehow I had gotten to talk to this guy, and I asked him, like, do you have any advice for people making show reels? Because he'd have to review a lot of artist work, and he's like, avoid flying logos and space scenes, just because everyone does it. So there's always, for me, like, I had never done any space scenes till about 10 years in, so I was kind of lucky.
That's absolutely true, even back in the days, which is why I included at least a picture of it was a landscape scene, I think, with sticking in the ground, and there was some very there was some grass on the floor, but back in the days, the scattering, not the scattering, to place the grass, it was all polygonal, because I didn't know how else to do it, so it was very sparse. There wasn't much grass around,
Or you
because
run
my
out of
machine,
memory.
yeah, my machine couldn't handle it. And I was just like, you just imagine there would be more grass. So I sold the picture.
That's awesome. Yeah, I still remember the days of Bryce and Poveri as well, like doing a lot of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Like, obviously you've worked on a lot of really big projects, and rather than getting onto like your favorite or anything first, I'd love to know, like, what was probably the most epic project that you worked on, that the most challenging, either catastrophic or
Yeah. Well, the most epic one was definitely Avatar. I mean, that was just, that was the reason why I applied back in the days at Weta. And they didn't put me on Avatar, but on The Day the Earth Stood Still. Avatar was in production back in the day. And I was like, oh, what do you want to do, Avatar? But you have to do first The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I was like, oh. So at first I was disappointed, but then I looked at what they planned on The Day the Earth Stood Still, and it was two scenes I always wanted to do, like a lot of particles, and you had to control these particles, and the particles were eating away the world somehow, and they weren't really sure how to do that. So even though I wanted to go on Avatar, the most challenging project I've ever done, I actually ended up doing the most challenging shots I've ever done. That was for The Day the Earth Stood Still, because these particles were just a bitch to control, and we did it all in Maya, and there were two brilliant programmers who wrote us some tools to help us to get these particles under control. But there's a limit to everything, and when the studio comes in and art directs pretty much patches of particles, no matter, it doesn't really matter what kind of awesome tools you have.
Yeah.
This stuff is really, really challenging. And so yeah, these so the two shots that I've done for The Day the Earth Stood Still, where the truck gets eaten away and the stadium that gets eaten away,
That's
done.
funny because those are my two favorite shots.
Yeah.
Not so brown nose, but when I think of the Day There Stood Still, there's the truck and the stadium, and then there's like a sign on the side of the road that I'm always looking at. But that's awesome.
Yeah, it was. I wish I could say it was fun, and it was fun for about 3 months, but we ended up working on it for 8 months.
Oh God.
And the truck shot, I think, was a Weta record back in the days. We ended up doing 1,100 revisions for just the truck shot. So
Wow.
I think that it was just 3 or 4 shots,
Wow.
and we did for the main shot with over 1,100 versions, and all these versions would be fine to show in the cinema.
Yep. I
It's-
love that.
Yeah, it's that's just how Weta works. They don't do stuff the half the way. They just go full the way all the time. You know, everything is full on all the time, and so they really pushed me to my limits on these couple of shots for 8 months, and it ended up, you know, being awesome. To be honest, if I look at, you know, these shots on my reel, I'm still proud to you know, that I have done them.
That's so cool. Yeah, I remember wasn't last Christmas, but the Christmas before, like 2013, and I was talking with a few friends of mine who are over at Weta, and they're like, "Yeah, we're doing Hobbit 2. We've got 3 days left, and we have 500 plus shots we still need to get finalized."
Yeah.
And the thing was, like, at the time, which maybe I shouldn't mention, but um, that, you know, at the time it was all stereo, and they decided, you know, well, we're probably not going to get the 48 frames stereo out, so we're probably just
Oh
going to have
yeah.
to split it all in Nuke and you know, cheat it, basically, like retime everything in OFlow to go 48 frames rather than 24. And so at the time I was shocked. I'm like, wow, because Peter Jackson's pushing the 48 frame versions, and then suddenly it's like, okay, we don't have time to even do it for our own shots.
We fake it.
However, like about 2 months later, one of my buddies came back to LA, and we're having a beer, and I'm like, yeah, so like, I can't believe you guys did that. They're like, oh no, we actually got those 500 plus shots done, 48 frames a second, and out the door in time in those three
Really?
days. So I'm like, you're
Wow.
kidding me. And a lot of them actually were heavy effect shots that they were able to just knock out like revision after revision from scratch
Wow.
in that
Yeah.
amount of time. So
I think
um,
Weta is still the biggest render farm on this planet, right?
well, they actually a lot of time, like during downtime, and I doubt they have downtime these days, but especially after a lot of the rings, they were outsourcing a lot of their equipment to all the telecommunication companies in New Zealand because they had
Wow.
so much more power than um, the
Yeah.
the phone companies did. So yeah, it's shocking, but
Yeah, they have cool technology there.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and you get spoiled, you know, if you work there and you just used to crank out final shots, you know, in a day. And if you work somewhere else, you're like, that's not possible. Why?
Yeah, yeah.
You get used to that stuff really quickly.
So like that was most challenging was more the day they stood still, or
Yeah, I would. I mean, that was definitely challenging to do 1,100 versions of the same shot for over 8 months was pretty challenging. You know, for everything your sanity and of course your artistic skills.
yeah. I
But
would.
this turned out to be to be good. So
I'd love
I
if you were
was.
writing a diary every day because it'd be like, Dear Diary, day 320, still on the same shot.
Yeah, yeah. Even this the supervisor, I think he wrote on CG Talk and making off. I don't know who it was. I think that they wrote it down that it was that many revisions because it was just company record. It was crazy.
Wow, that's
But you
amazing.
know, it basically it wasn't Weta's fault. It was just that the studio really didn't really decided what they wanted to see or what they wanted to have, and they could just make up their mind when they saw the final version of it.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's always a challenge, I
no, that's
guess.
so cool. And I'm just curious about Avatar. Like, what was your experience like working on that?
Yeah, that was the biggest thing I ever worked on. It was a huge show and it was super exciting. And I was actually surprised to find out that we had to crank out shots pretty much every week.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, so, but we didn't actually because we had so much R&D to do. The effects team for Avatar was relatively small. I think, you know, that was the biggest challenge on Avatar. We had a lot of effect shots to do, and the effects team was relatively small. I think, you know, the team who've done all the effects. I mean, or at least the research and the research and development and you know, the heavy kind of stuff like find out how it looks that the tree burns, and how do we find out that how the plants are interacting and moving and so on. I think the team would just had a size of maybe eight.
whoa, okay, pretty mind
uh,
blowing.
yeah, it was for back in the days, and now they have, I think, yeah, twice as big now,
Cool.
the effects team. So
Yeah,
that was definitely the biggest challenge. Obviously we had help later on, you
yeah,
know, as the show was approaching the finish, we got more and more people who we could farm out our solutions.
yeah.
And
I gotta brag about that because we were doing that at ILM at the time, and actually, oddly enough, most of the work that ILM did on Avatar was all 3ds Max, which I don't think you get to hear about. But obviously they were using Plume for all the fire and pyrotechnics, but everything else
Yeah.
was 3ds Max in Brazil for rendering. And
Oh, that fire shot ILM did was amazing. It
yeah,
just blowed our minds.
it was really cool what they were doing. But like the cool part was, and this is what I get to brag about, is the fact that when I got to see Avatar, like George Lucas obviously invented, like not invented, but always pushed digital cinema. So like he's been doing a lot of stuff for since Phantom Menace for trying to get that to be more mainstream.
Mm.
And yeah, I actually got invited to watch like, about 3 or 4 days before the movie came out. We watched Avatar at the ranch
Cool.
in George Lucas private theater. So that was really cool just to have that experience. So that was
Yeah.
pretty sweet getting to see it there. But
I have to
um,
say that, I mean, when we saw our shots for the first time, because, to be honest, when you work on a show like that, you don't know what you're working on. You just, do whatever you told, and then you see, of course, whenever something flows together, you kind of get a glimpse of how it might look. So the first time we had that screening in Peter Jackson's cinema, and where kind of saw how James Cameron envisioned everything, it was mind blowing. We're just like, whoa.
no, it's so cool. Is there any specific shots that kind of stand out as your baby, the ones that you're proudest of?
I guess, yeah, sure. That's the explosion.
Hmm.
I always loved doing explosions, but for some reason I just had the opportunity to do one on Avatar, and it was the one where I don't know, one of these flying dragons was catching one of the helicopters and throwed it against the cliff
Oh,
and
cool.
exploded. So I was very proud of that, especially because kind of it was shown to Joe Letteri, and he
Hmm.
kind of looked at all the shots that he approved or not, and he looked at that, and as I remember, he thought it was one of the ILM ones, and he kind of went away. So I was like, yes,
That's great. That's awesome.
lucky.
And just curious, like, what tools were you using for all the fluids? I'm kind of nerding out now, but I'm just because I know you do a lot of Maya, and I'm just wondering, like,
Yeah, well, Weta did at that time a lot of Maya. I don't know what they're doing now, but back in the day, they did a lot of Maya. So all the fluids was simulated all in Maya. It was
cool.
all Maya fluids. And we had having said that, we had a brilliant guy, Christopher Edwards. He wrote us some very cool fluid shading rendering tools. So even though the simulation was handled all in Maya, the rendering side was all Weta's, Christopher Edwards tools.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, like, obviously you've been working all over the world, so you worked for many leading studios in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, and of course Europe as well. I'm just kind of curious whether there was much of a difference between working at each studio like, and the teams as well, and how they'd approach projects.
Yes, definitely. I think at Weta they had this famous Kiwi spirit. We just find out how to do things as we go,
Hmm.
which was awesome because you felt always like a pioneer. Every shot was like you pioneered something. Like, oh yeah, let's find out how we do it and make it even better. So that in Australia it was more chaotic. Very laid back in a way, but then again, very chaotic later on in the production. And but that's still post production, right?
Yeah.
And in Germany, it's very analytical. How do other companies do things? And okay, let's look at that, and then we kind of do whatever we find how other companies are doing that, and we're surprised that it doesn't look that great.
Well, it kind of blows my mind because, especially like in the late '90s and early 2000, like most of my friends that I knew at least like online, like working in the industry, all came from Germany, and it blew my mind how many talented guys were coming out of like Germany, which is such a tiny country, and I always joke about it now because both for effects as well as for especially lighting, there's a lot of guys who, whenever I speak to studios and like, well, we need to get artists, I'm like, well, you should just go to Germany and you'll pick up a crap ton of these guys. So,
That is true. I actually heard rumors that ILM was thinking about opening a pod in Berlin.
hmm,
That was years back. That was, I don't know, before they went to Singapore, and yeah, it would have made sense because there's some great talent pool here. But I think most of them are actually all gone now to London or to New Zealand actually, or yeah, wherever the wind blows.
I've got a buddy, Florian Schroeder. He worked at Weta. He's a compositor, but
Yeah.
he'd always keep
Yeah,
coming
there's a
back.
huge German community in New Zealand.
That's awesome. So one thing is like obviously you've been working on this book, and yeah, I mean for me, like I mentioned this before we got started, but like as soon as I saw it, I was just like I got to get this, and I ordered it instantly, just because I think that it's just something that we all kind of need, and obviously there's been a lot going on with like okay the industry is unstable and there's lots of crazy things going on, but your book is something that's great because I think it gives a chance to kind of educate everyone about not only what's going on but more about like how and why this whole machine how it functions. So I think that was definitely something to
Mm.
that everyone can really benefit from. But before we dive into the book, what were the main things that you hope that people would get from reading this book?
Well, I guess I met so many people who, first of all, didn't really know what visual effects really are and what they do when they are to the movie industry. And then again, they also didn't know where they were in such deep trouble. They just saw that kind of, visual effects are pretty much everywhere in every movie and TV production.
Yeah.
Obviously, everybody knows about them, but they didn't really understood why it is that Rhythm and Hues went bankrupt, or Digital Domain had problems, or
Yep.
why are all these green pictures over Facebook and so on. So that I try to just decode that, and so that's why I kind of took a lot of time to write about the history of visual effects, because I wanted to explain a little bit to the ordinary guy where we come from, and at the same time it's a good analytical point of view, because to understand in what situation you are, you have to reflect back. You have to kind of see where you come from, and then you kind of see in what kind of, or you understand what kind of situation you're in, and then maybe you can look out to the future and things are developing. So that was the main idea of the book. I mean, actually, to be honest, when I started writing it, I had something completely different in mind. I
Oh yeah.
wanted to, I think I wanted to just write something how to get into visual effects or something. So and then the book turned out to be a total rant, about what's all wrong about the industry, and it felt so good. The first draft felt so good, and then I saved the file and I never looked at it again for I don't know maybe a year or so, and
Wow.
then. Yeah, but while I didn't look at it, I gathered all the information, and then I reopened my draft, and I thought, this book should be something completely different.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's why, it is more an analysis about how the industry, where the industry came from, how it looks now, and where it's, developing.
Hmm.
And I think this is, if I would imagine, starting out in the industry, I don't know, if I imagine a mini Pierre,
Hmm.
I don't know, 14 years ago, I wished I would have had this book, because it would kind of given me an inside look into how the game works. And then when I understand the game and I try to explain the game in the book, then I could actually form strategies.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I don't judge anything in the book. I just pretty much tell how things are, and I let the reader decide what he kind of takes away of it.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Just so that way it's kind of cleared up. Like, there's no misconception about like, you're approaching this book not as like trying to say how we're doomed or anything like that. It's more about understanding like what's going on and why, and more to kind of educate people so that way they can kind of understand how better to work within this industry and have more of a better approach, be more educated going into this business. So, because I mean, I hear that a lot. You hear, especially from people who don't know VFX, they say, "Oh yeah, I heard about that. That place that closed down, and it's a really shaky industry, isn't it?" And they don't really understand like the specifics, other than okay, that's like a really doomed industry right now. And then everyone inside of VFX, what they hear is okay, everything's being outsourced and things suck right now, and it's something to do with incentives and something to do with this. Like, a lot of people don't have any understanding as to what really is going on. It's more about just the big rants about how bad things are, and having a bit of
Yeah.
understanding, I think, is going to help everyone actually,
Well,
you know,
and I think that outsourcing is not all that bad, to be
no.
honest. I think it's a natural thing. This is just globalism at its best.
Hmm.
to be honest, that's why Germany kind of is where it is because of outsourcing. So and that outsourcing in a way catched up to visual effects is natural and normal. I think what and that's kind of the point that I tried to draw in the book is that subsidies kind of just put it on gasoline pretty much. They just I don't know, they just set it on fire and everything was leveraged. So this outsourcing thing was just stronger because of subsidies, and I just tried to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you look at the whole machine of how a film is made. I mean, essentially, from day one, the whole thing is just an outsourcing project where initially, someone has an idea for a movie, they go to a movie studio, and my opinion of movie studios is they're like a bank, all they're looking for is a huge
in a way,
return.
a film studio is outsourcing.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Like they then say, okay, well, we want to do this. You go, like, they get an EP to go and essentially assemble a team, and then everything from pre-production through to post-production, it's calling on companies to go and, do their part. So the whole thing is just a big machine that has its parts, and, I think it's more, some people look at it negatively when suddenly that service is maybe being taken overseas rather than being done in their backyard. And I think it's mainly LA, just because LA has been the heart of it all for so long that they kind of, there's a bit of a
it's an irony, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a bittersweet irony that of all cities in the world, it's LA who's losing all the visual effects jobs, and it's very sad.
Well,
it's very sad.
I've seen in Australia, like at one point years ago, we had The Matrix being filmed out there. We had Star Wars being filmed out there, or portions of Star Wars being filmed out there. At Fox Studios, we were going to be doing iRobot and Mad Max, which is just about to come out now finally. But yeah, I mean, like there was like a big boom, and it actually was because of incentives. I think the government was willing to put up, I think, 40% if people would come and do stuff out there. And as soon as they retracted that, all the work went away. And eventually it came back again years later. They did the same thing, and naturally everyone comes back. And it's kind of like going to a zoo and throwing food. Animals are gonna come and hang out with you, but as soon as the food's gone,
it's free money. It's free food. Of course you go after it. It just makes sense. Everybody would do it. I think if you put yourself into the situation of the film production, you would just do the exact same. So I wouldn't blame them. I actually blaming more the governments that they're doing it.
Absolutely. And that's I think you mentioned this in the book too, is like I think there are some countries or cities, actually I should be more specific, that are doing it the right way, where I look at let's say Baton Rouge and down in New Orleans. They're kind of doing the subsidy thing, but a lot of studios are temporarily setting up, and as soon as things dry up, they're out of there. Whereas like Vancouver, they've kind of done it in a way that a lot of studios that do set up there, it looks more like it's going to be more of a permanent thing. Like if it ever does, or when it does dry up, a lot of these studios probably are going to be sustainable and be able to take on more of the local market still. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be such a rapid dispersion of.
Well, I don't know if I think if Vancouver loses some of the subsidies, I think the situation will change dramatically there.
It will to some degree, just because it's such a hot spot now that everyone's there.
It's just everyone is there. Everybody has an outpost, and also if you look at the companies that are there, they're all just in the in between. They're all just renting office. Nobody's building a big huge office and just puts down its roots and says we're going to stay here for at least 10 years. To me it looks more like we're going to stay here and see how it goes, because I think everybody knows that subsidies are not a thing that are lasting.
That's right.
So they're just making, they just use them as long as they're there, and then I go wherever, the subsidies are going to be better, and whatever other country.
Just keep chasing it. I actually lived in Vancouver in 2009, and there was no film industry. There was 3 or 4 studios. And, I was working in games just because I went out there for a very specific job, and there was no studios at all. I had to leave.
I think the X-Files started.
The what, sorry?
The X-Files.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the old series with Fox Mulder?
Vancouver was a big film city, but in terms of visual effects, I should be more specific. Because, there's basically at the time, Vancouver was the 3rd biggest film city in North America. So LA, New York, Vancouver. Now, of course, it's the heart of pretty much everything, New York and Vancouver. But
I think next to London, it's the capital of visual effects right now.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, why those two big cities are doing so well. It's because of incentives. So, obviously there's a
Are the cities
sustainable.
really doing so well? I don't know if I don't know if the taxpayers of Canada gain anything from paying big corporations money to produce the films there.
That's a good point. It does go to the film studios. It's not going to, necessarily.
No, and I explain in the book how film studios are reducing the risk to by 90%. So they don't even end up paying, I don't know, 200 million for a movie. They end up paying maybe 15 or 20 or 10, sometimes even nothing.
Wow. So I'm kind of curious. Like, you started out like you studied economics, I believe, at university, and is that right?
Well, at the school, yeah,
Yeah.
and it wasn't in a university.
Okay. Well, but I mean, for you
In
having.
Germany, we have a very different education system.
Fair
It's a
enough.
little weird, but I ended up with a Bachelor of Economics,
Hmm.
but I really didn't saw myself as a banking clerk or as a, I don't know, a small merchant. So, and I did all this graphic stuff on the side, and then I looked at the wages that my friends, from school were doing, starting out, of course. And then, I looked at the booming visual effects industry, and I thought, maybe I'll try my luck over there. And I was right. In the beginning, I was banking much bigger checks, and
Yeah.
now it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. But I mean, I think that's one thing we have in common is more about like I definitely look at visual effects from the more of a business point of view and not more to monetize on it, but in terms of how things are structured, how companies work. We talked a bit about that, but I mean, I'm kind of curious about for you whether having a bit more of a background and a bit more of an interest in the economical side, whether that did kind of make you look at everything that you do in the industry a bit differently to other artists, let's say.
Yeah, well, it did. I mean, I mentioned briefly that the first book was supposed to be a very different book because I think the big idea why I felt like I should start writing about this industry was because noticed how, because I did a lot of freelancing in Germany, and I noticed how my colleagues are hugely undervaluing their service. And I felt at least that don't realize what the hell they're doing there. And for example, the most basic thing is actually, if a company pays you late, so let's say you charge something that you find yourself, let's say you charge something that you're happy with, that's good. But if you don't demand to be paid when you're supposed to be paid, that's a problem because the company owes you money. And if they don't pay you on time, it's kind of like a loan to them. So they're refinancing their time over you. So
Hmm.
you're financing the company.
Yeah.
And and then they don't even charge the company interest for that time. It's just basic stuff like that. And when I talk to to my colleagues about this kind of basic stuff, they were like, yeah, but everybody does that, and if I do that, they will never hire me again, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that was one of the big reasons why I thought, maybe I should write something about that. Well, the book didn't turn out to be about that. It's more about the game of visual effects, but I think it does bring across that visual effects, nevertheless, is a business,
Yeah.
and the product is pictures. And the pictures to create is sometimes as elaborate as building a construction building on, I don't know, Wall Street or in the harbor. It's just as elaborate. It takes millions. It takes effort, and I cannot imagine a construction builder, for example, working on the next high tower, because he has so much fun and he doesn't want to bill his boss, for the time. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's
I
funny
mean, this
'cause
this might be just a German problem. I don't know
no,
how it.
we talked for a long time just before we did this call, and there's a lot of things that I figured I'd wait until we get into it later, but I mean, I think we share a lot of the same philosophies about that. Like for me, I always look at like visual effects as you're painting a house, and I say that because most people don't treat what we do as a business, and both in terms of taking how we treat ourselves as an artist, for instance. So whether
Yeah.
we see it like I'm an artist and I'm doing all this amazing stuff, and it's like, well, for me, I treat this like I'm painting a house. And if someone comes to me and says like, okay, I want to paint my house pink and yellow, I'm gonna say, okay, well, I may suggest it's not the best idea, but if they want that, then I'm going to go do it. I'm not going to take it personally and say,
Exactly. And
you know,
and in this moment, you're not an artist anymore. I think you're a designer.
yeah,
And therefore I feel like that we should call ourselves visual effects designers and not visual effects artists. Because if I go to an artist and I tell him, if he draws a picture, and I go to him and say, oh, I don't like what you're drawing there. I think you should, this figure over there should be a little bigger and this hand should be a little smaller. He would tell me to fuck off. And I think he's right, so, because he's just, living his dream, and he should live his dream. And he's an artist. Maybe he finds someone who pays his lifestyle. I don't know. But it's not me as a customer, because I want this hand to be bigger. But to a designer on the other side, I go to him, hey, can you move the sofa to the right? And he says, sure, how far?
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. You're not being hired to come and paint what you picture to be an amazing painting or an amazing thing. Like, you're being hired as one of a group of people to fulfill a service. So
Yeah.
you're hired to come in, and the client or director is going to say, I want this, and you've got to say, okay, great, I'll go and do that. And they might say, you know what, I think it looks like shit, let's change it, we're going to go in a different direction. And I do see so many people take this stuff so personally, and I've seen artists go as far as to be like physically restrained because the director is in the other room, and they want to go in there in tears and tell them that their new direction that they're going with, like adding a lens flare to a shot, is going to ruin their movie, and they worked so much on that shot that they're not going to allow them to add the lens flare or whatever the director wanted. And it's like, dude, like, if you want, when the show is over, we can remove the lens flare and we can add that new shot to your reel. But if the director wants that, he's the one technically paying the bill, or at least he's in charge of the creative direction. So you go and do it. You shut up and you do what you're told. And that's kind of what it comes down to. Like, we want it to be more glorious than that, but at the same time, like, we are fulfilling a thing. And that's why I go back to the whole house thing, because you're painting a house and you're gonna just follow direction. If they want something, that you're gonna do it. And at the same time, like, when it comes to treating things like a business, a lot of people don't want to go out and promote themselves and try and do branding or try and apply for work. Well, if someone is like the greatest artist in the world, if they're the greatest house painter in the world, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you don't go out there and do the business side of things and networking and advertise, do everything else to get work, then no one's going to know about you. So you need to start to kind of cover that end as well, or get someone else to share that interest, because otherwise you're going to basically just jump from job to job and hope that there's work at the end of it, instead of thinking ahead and trying to think a bit more strategically about how to get more work, how to expand on what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also, part really where the pressure gets created, because if you see your service as a business, you would start billing hourly, for example. And if you bill hourly, which I'm a huge fan of, then you don't give a shit anymore about all the supervisor revisions.
Yeah.
You don't care. You just do whatever he says. And if the supervisor has its own vision about the movie and he gets corrected, feedback by the supervisor, and the whole show drags on longer, good for you. You make more money. You don't care.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but if you're billing, I don't know, if you get paid per month, then this is the problem again, because it means maybe you have to work free overtime. So I think this is, because there are all sorts of contracts in the industry, and this is where, I think there's a huge collision in interest there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like one of the worst things is, if you are on, let's say, a day or a weekly rate, and again, some places it's just how it is, but it's up to you whether or not to accept that. And and that's actually one thing I will say is that, like, I see a lot of people who will go in and they complain about their money. Like, they start working, they start bitching about how they're not being paid enough. For me, like, there's been times when I've taken a bit of a pay cut, but I was the one who agreed to it. So I'm not going to go and bitch and moan about I'm not being paid enough, because I agreed to it. If I wasn't happy, then fine. Like, I can say no.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the next time you can up your pay or try to, but they're having that unhappiness with it is not productive. And
one of the main lessons I learned, during all these years is that it doesn't really matter if I bill, let's say, 100 euros or 1,000 euros per day. It doesn't really matter, because they always want you to perform on the maximum. So I always felt like, well, then I should better go for the maximum. If they expect from me the maximum, they should pay me the maximum. I really did both. You know, I made mistakes as well where I undervalued myself, and because I thought, yeah, you know, maybe it's a test and they want to test me out, and then, you know, once I perform well, then maybe I get a raise or whatever. No, it doesn't really matter. You're always, you know, even if you work for free these days, they want you to perform on the maximum. So better get paid for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I had lunch the other day with a producer, and I've known this and believed this my entire life, but I've never actually heard a producer say these words. And he was saying to me, like, Alan, like, you know, you've freelanced your entire career, like, you know what it's like. If you were to come in and say, you know, I want $300 or $400 a day, just because you're going to do them a favor, you know that they're going to fucking hold you to that for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And you know, there is no like, okay, well, next time we'll do right by you. They may say that, but
No.
for the rest of their time, they're gonna label you as you're the $300 guy.
You're the cheap guy.
Exactly. And if
And
they
they're
need
gonna
someone good, then they're gonna go and pay the $1,000 guy what he wants. They're not gonna say, hey, we need someone. We're gonna pay you $1,000 this time around. It's gonna be,
Yeah.
you know, you're the $300 guy now for the rest of your life. As long as you work here, that's what you will be.
Yeah.
And you know, I've always believed that, but to actually,
Mm.
for once, actually hear a producer say it, I'm like, yes.
The theory is right.
and
It's not a theory, it's the reality.
and that's it. And
It
like,
is.
I was talking to someone the other day, which shocked me because I don't hear this too much. But someone I was talking to about how they first started out, they were saying that, you know, I worked for a game company, and to get in the door, I took a major pay cut. And I said, well, what kind of major pay cut? And he's like, I worked for a year and a half for free to get into the industry. And they told me that if you don't do this, then someone else will take the job, and good luck trying to break into the industry. So he worked for a year and a half. And I've heard similar stories over time. And at the time, I bit my tongue for a little bit, but I talked to him later about how that completely imbalances the industry for everyone, not beginners and not seniors, but everyone when you do that kind of stuff. And it shocks me that companies are actually willing to do that.
Well, there's an oversupply of workers right now in the industry, and I think I document that in the book quite well. There's just far too much talented people, far too many talented people doing the same things. And I mean, you know, if you want to get out of the company, it feels like that the company just has to push the elevator button and there comes a new one to replace you. You know, because I think partly it has something to do because the software got so easy. Or it's not completely easy. Obviously, you still have to have some sort of artistic skills. So there's still a human factor into everything. But I don't know, you know, because if someone is doing to work for free, if is doing the work for free, you know, it's very hard to compete with that. It's very hard.
Now, at the same time, what typically happens when someone does come in and say, okay, I'll work for free because I want to get my foot in the door, what that does is it lowers the expectations of studios when they say, okay, well, people are willing to work for free or work for bottom dollar. What happens is it means that every single other person who's going to apply at that studio, they're going to get the same treatment. Exactly.
Yep.
And at the same time, then senior staff as well, who've been in this for 20 years or whatever, they're going to come in and say, okay, well, I've got all this experience I'm going to bring to the table. And the studio is going to say, well, we can hire 3 people for next to nothing, or we can pay you. So we're just going to hire a bunch of other people with less experience because, you know, we're going to get more bang for our buck. So, you know, they kind of get screwed on the other side of the spectrum. So it kind of causes this major imbalance overall when someone does do that. And more importantly, it's taking advantage of someone who's new and eager to learn, and they're instantly being used and abused and kind of chewed up and spat out before they even start.
I think it's so important to understand when you're starting out that you are entering in an industry and it's a business. And the company, whoever employs you, wants to crunch out a profit. They don't, you know, do this for fun. You may do it for fun, but they don't do it for fun. So, and if you're undervaluing yourself, or if you even work there for free, a company to underbid the competitors, and that will in the end destroy the industry.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
it actually pressured the industry already to a big extent. I mean, I write in the book about that school who did that movie, Creature of the Southern Wild. It got an Oscar nomination for Best Visual Effects. They had a bunch of students crunching out shots which are just brilliant, and I'm sure they did it. I mean, I write about how cheap it was done. I think I said that the production company saved about $500,000 dollars on the production value, which is $500,000 in cash. If they would have taken these shots to a studio, it would have cost them at least $500,000 more. That's a lot of money. And in the end, the movie does, I don't know how many 1,000% in profits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And these students, as talented as they may be, and maybe they're all working now in the industry, help them to increase their profit margins. But I doubt that they reduce their student loan.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at George Lucas, for instance, being someone who, with Star Wars, he decided to, I think, withdraw his director fee for getting more money on the back end. And
of course,
the thing is, you're not gonna get that deal where it's like, okay, well, I'll work for free, but then give me a percentage of the profits. Like, it just doesn't work.
No.
Well, I should say they don't allow that to work. But
and also it was his business. It was a different situation for him. He knew that when he owned the IP, he would maybe potentially gain so much more if the product ended up to be good, and he was right.
Yeah, he was very right.
Yeah,
but
back in the day, science fiction IPs was considered to be worthless, so they thought, oh yeah, great.
yeah, exactly. But I don't know, for you, I mean, you've already mentioned this a little bit, but obviously you started out with one intention for the book, and then over time it gradually shifted. But for you to have written Inside VFX, was there a specific aha moment where you kind of realized that, okay, I want to write this book, or was it more of a gradual experience?
The aha moment, I think the biggest aha moment was when I wrote about the visual effects volatility.
Mm-hmm.
So the ups and downs of studio closures and openings. And at that time, Rhythm and Hues was just closing, or at least now they got bought out by, was it Prana? I think Prana.
Yeah, it was Prana.
Yeah, and at that time, it sounded like maybe they would go down, and there was all these green pictures, and I thought, oh my God, maybe I should write more about, how the volatility, how extreme the volatility is, and because nobody really collected the data where we come from, how many closures we had in the past and versus openings, and how much we are having now. And to me, it was such a huge surprise to find out that the industry was extremely volatile from the beginning. We just didn't notice because the whole industry was booming so much. And that's when I just thought, oh my God, this is great. I just have to write more about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I wondered, because for someone to write a book like this, it's definitely one of those, like, was it like, oh yeah, I'm going to write something, this is what I'm going to write about, but sometimes there's going to be that moment of, like, kind of like the pivotal moment in the movie where they're like, okay, like, I've been screwed, time to sit down, and the montage music starts playing. It's like, time to show the world. I was curious, like, how long did it take you to write the book, start to finish?
Let's say it was a research work of almost 4 years. Mm-hmm. Close to 4 years. It's quite research intensive. I wasn't born with all that stuff that's in the book. I was traveling the world. I was studying economics, and at the same time, I was researching the visual effects industry. And to write everything down took me a lot of time. I mean, before I went to ILM, I already had a draft in my drawer. And then at ILM, I signed something that I'm not supposed to write or do anything. So I haven't done anything. And then once I finished that, but they didn't, I didn't sign anything that stopped me from thinking. So I just did, a lot of thinking in my head and a lot of researching. And then once I was done with ILM, I wrote it all. That's the product.
I love the paperwork because you sign, obviously, like, is there any intellectual property you want to disclose? And one of the things which is unique to that studio is that they say we reserve the right to own your likeness. And for me, I'm always, like, I'm not sure if you noticed that, but that was always a common thing when I was there. They owned the likeness of you, and I thought, okay, so if you made a video game about me, then I'm not gonna get any profits from this. But I mean, obviously, it's more for behind the scenes videos or anything you're captured on. They don't need to.
Well, I mean, you kind of out in the open.
Yeah.
Yep. They can do with you whatever they want, and the ILM contract, I think it's fine to say that was the most extreme contract I've ever signed. And looking back, I'm not sure what I did.
So I'm curious, because I do love that about your book, is like it's very analytical, and I think that people need that because, again, I feel like there's a lot of constant waves of information about like we're all screwed and like all these things, but it it doesn't have anything to back it up in terms of like where there is instability and why. And for you, I find that especially the first half of the book, it's more of like a economics 101. It goes through the history of visual effects to, or in Hollywood in general, just to kind of get people, kind of up to speed, so that way they've got a quick amount of education to be able to then follow the book at the level it should be followed at. And I found that to be really great, because otherwise a lot of people are going to look at it and be like, okay, well, this book isn't for me, it's more graphs and charts. But having all the information, kind of really be able to relate it both sorry, between the past as well as now. I mean, even having the shadow stats was really great, just because inflation is something that most people don't take into consideration. And like, even if you're buying a house or doing something like that, you might buy a house for $200,000 and you're like, you know what, 10 years later I sold it for $400,000. Like, I made a huge profit on this. And you take inflation into it, it's like maybe you made 20 grand on that, over that 10 years.
And what is even more important to understand is that it's not an investment, it's a speculation you were doing. And as you know, speculations sometimes work out and sometimes they don't. If you put $200,000 in a house, you end up paying in 30 years something like $500,000 if you keep it.
Yeah.
You have to keep that in mind. And then, of course, there's the inflation on top of that. And if you then sell it, I don't know, in 10 years for $500,000, it's pure luck. It's not something you should count on.
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, it's something. So I think the inflation chapters is one of the. It's obviously one of my most favorites, and it's so critical to understand inflation and to know the difference between money and currency. Yeah. Really, because currency is something that just flows. Money is the only thing that's supposed to last. And I think, in the world we don't really have money left. Just gold and silver is actually money. It's actually just worth to be called money.
I really love that chapter, actually, because that was something I didn't know much about, and like it makes so much sense. And for me, I love that, because it gave me a lot of understanding as to where money came from, because I'm always fascinated by that. I mean, if you were to get a $50 note and a $10 note, put them next to each other, the only difference between the two is what one represents. And
it's our belief.
Yeah, and it really comes down to that. And even just to look at gold, and I think it was around the 50s, having the law passed to trade in all of your gold. I thought, it actually blew my mind, because it kind of brings me back to just the whole concept of what laws can be passed that are completely outside of what is right or wrong. Is like, you need to, yeah. So I love that. Actually, it was really amazing. Just as like a side note, but I'm always curious about like the process, and for you to go through your writing process, were there any big like plateaus or dilemmas that you kind of went through during this book, or was it more of a straight process?
No, that wasn't straight at all. I thought at least 3 times to stop doing that, and I asked myself at least 20 times, why the hell am I doing that? I was at least a couple of times of not doing that. I actually just talked to people that I'm writing something to keep myself doing it, because I knew, and I tell this person I'm writing that there's a sort of responsibility for me to finish it, because you have to do what you say. At least that's what what I just judge myself like that. You always have to do what you say, and as soon as I put the word out that I am to my friends that I'm writing something, I felt that I have a responsibility to finish it. If I wouldn't have done it, I don't know if I would have finished it. It would probably be still on a draft on my laptop. And the second thing was a deadline. I gave myself a lot of deadlines, when something has to be finished. And it was actually a lot of work to get it done till then. I had lots of late nights, and my wife, missed me very much during that time. We were traveling in Asia for 3 months, and I was sometimes just writing the whole time about things and researching stuff. And Asia has brilliant internet connection. Wherever you go in Asia, you have internet. Amazing.
That's cool. So actually, that's really great to talk about. I mean, so you found like having that accountability of both to your friends and to yourself with like those mini goals along the way, the milestones. That was something that kept you kind of hitting those goals the whole way and staying consistent.
Definitely, yeah. I would still be working on it, I'm pretty sure. You need to have deadlines.
Yeah.
I guess that's and to bring the discussion a little bit back to the visual effects.
I already know what you're going to say, but yeah, go ahead.
I think that's where the visual effects industry sometimes gets it wrong. So where they give the team false deadlines, where everybody just looks at themselves, and just like, yeah, that's not going to happen. You know, I think it's very important to give yourself or your team a realistic deadline. Otherwise, the deadline is just not real. It's not capable. I don't know. It doesn't, you know, if you think before you start doing it that you can't reach the goal, it's not a goal at all. So I gave myself deadlines which are doable.
Yeah.
So my plan was to publish the book by December, and I barely made it.
That's cool.
Yeah, I got you know, I discussions. I think 1 month before publication, and he gave me a bunch of notes to kind of, you know, fix about what went on Titanic and how Digital Domain really folded. You know, obviously he has much better insights into this kind of stuff than I ever had. So yeah, and thanks to him, this is all much better than it was. But I'm just saying, you know, this was all a very short timeline.
Yeah, actually, that's really coally and actually, what was the publishing process like? I'm going to nerd out a little bit about this part because it's something I'm personally interested in. But like, working with your publisher, was that something that was a pretty easy process, or was it more a lot of back and forth with revisions and everything else?
Well, that's the thing now. You know, we're entering the times of publishing 3.0 as it's called right now. So, and you know, the traditional publishing model, you have a publisher, you know, whatever the name is, XYZ, and they say, oh yeah, we like your draft and we're going to take care of it. And then you get notes and you kind of, you know, they give you deadlines and you have to fulfill it. And then they don't do advertising for you. And then you have to go out and do everything. You have to ask for permission to do whatever you want to do. And they just put out the book, and then they take pretty much 99% of the profits. And so when I had the choice to do the traditional publishing route or the self-publishing route, aka publishing 3.0, I early on decided to go the new route. And the reason is many famous writers are actually doing the same now, and that kind of, you know, got that's where I thought that, you know, this is very serious now. You know, like James Altucher, for example, he's a best-selling author and he just does everything with, you know, via self-publishing. Yep. It's publishing on demand, obviously. So that's a new thing. You don't have to print 10,000 books anymore. You just, you know, print one book if it's on, you know, whenever somebody orders, the book gets printed and gets shipped out to him, and it has the same quality as the book from the publisher.
Exactly.
And that's a game-changing thing. It means that you have no stocks anymore, and it's pressuring the traditional publishing model, and they're suffering. I saw that the publishers starting to create a stamp on their books, like, you know, it's proofed, it has a high quality publishing quality or whatever, you know, and they have all crazy stamps now on their books. It's like, oh yeah, great, much better. But you know, with publishing 3.0, you can do it in so many ways. You can do it without an editor. You can do it with an editor. You can, you know, if you have the skills, you can do it however you want. You can publish 80 pages. You can publish 340 like I did. Yeah. And so that's the big difference. You know, it's you are in the chair. You are the ultimate chairman who made. And the way I did it was I pretty much copied the traditional publishing route. So I had an editor. And I had a proofreader, I mean. So without those guys, you know, the product wouldn't be as good as it is now. I think they, you know, to have an editor and a proofreader, I think is the difference between horse shit and, you know, gold, actually.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's really cool. Actually, I've got one of James Altucher's books on my desk, The Power of No, because it's a big book for me this year to read, just because the biggest learning lesson I got from last year was overcommitting to too much stuff.
His new book, Choose Yourself, I would recommend it to everyone actually in the industry, because it's very valid to us.
Cool.
You know, it talks pretty much about how the corporations are changing right now, and that they are reducing their staff and their overhead, and that they are switching more towards the So if they need workers, they outsource it to India or to someone somewhere else. And he's making the claim that, if that you should maybe start a business, or, at least start to take care of yourself, because the big corporation doesn't really give a shit about you.
It's kind of true. Like the whole dollars for time philosophy. I mean, for us, like that's what the business we're in. But I mean, I've started to do that a lot differently these days, which is more I'll do a bid and work in that way of like, okay, well, I'll do it for this much money, and if we go over these many revisions, we will go back to this. And obviously, not everyone can do that, but it means that you're kind of handling yourself, and you're putting more responsibility on you, which means that you need to communicate with the producers and the teams that you're working with anyway about how everything's being run, to make sure it's being run correctly, because it's ultimately going to reflect on your work and your income as well. But again, like every studio is kind of different. Going back to sorry, go ahead.
This is just something very important you said, because economically speaking, when you find out that you can't have your way, with pricing yourself on the market, and you start to adapt to the market, to the lower end, this might be a problem to you, to your lifestyle, to your savings, to whatever you want to be. So I always say, if I don't get my price, I price myself out of the market. So in other words, if I don't get my price, whatever I need to kind of hold my lifestyle, I better do something else. Because in the end, it's money. It doesn't matter how you make your money. If you make your money with pictures, it's great, but you need money in the end, because otherwise, money might be evil. At least that's what most people think. I don't think it is evil, but you need money, because otherwise it's going to be a very sad life down the road.
Yeah.
You need to save, and you need to save early.
Yeah.
I mean, if you start saving with 20, that's great. If you start with 35, it's about time. With 45, 50, it might be too late.
That's exactly it.
Sorry. And the government is not taking care of you.
No, not at all. And for me, like, that's exactly what you just said. Like, for me, money equals freedom, equals time.
Yeah.
It gives me a chance to do whatever I want to do. And that was one thing starting out of my career, is like, I think you were probably the same way. Like, I started out very, very young, so I had all these senior people, like, in the industry around me who would naturally want to push what I would change in my life philosophies on me. So everyone's like, save your money, buy property, do this. And it kind of made me rebel, because I'm like, I got all these people are telling me what to do, and I'm 17 or 18 and I can do whatever the hell I want. So I do the opposite. I'd be like trying to throw money away and be stupid and travel and not really care about that stuff. And then finally you hit 30 and it's like, okay, there's been so many fluctuations where I go from having savings to then being like, okay, great, vacation 6 months, and then now I'm back to zero, time to go for savings. And finally I'm like, what I should have done when I was a bit younger is listen to those people who are telling me, just so that way you've got the opportunity to say, all right, well, I'm burned out, I'm going to take a break, or I want to do this, or have the freedom to do what you want. And
I think that's the big problem when you're young, or maybe it's a good thing, but you feel invincible. You think like nothing can harm you. Life is just open, for you, and you become the big millionaire if everything goes well.
Yeah, and the thing too is that we work brutal hours in this industry, and like I've always had the philosophy of like health and everything else. Like, I'll worry about that later. I got to get through this deadline. And then suddenly, like we were talking about one of the projects just before we did this that I did, and I burned out so bad at the end of it. It was the first and only time I've really ever burned out. But I needed 6 months off, and if I didn't have savings, I couldn't do that. I'd be in this like cycle, But I needed a break just to get my sanity back. And
that was very smart from you to take 6 months off, because that's the exact time that your body needs to de-stress.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't need 4 weeks or 2 weeks or a 1 month vacation. It actually does take 6 months for your body to completely de-stress. And very few people are aware of that. They think a 2 weeks vacation is enough. No, it's not.
No.
I felt it myself. I had 3 months off when I went to the next project, and I was super stressed, and my body couldn't take it at all. And take 6 months off. That's very smart after a high stress period.
That's what I did actually. I went to Thailand for a bit, and Singapore.
Awesome.
I was speaking out there, so I went to Thailand. I actually just sat on a beach and I just wrote and just kind of journaled and wrote all the plans that I wanted to do. And everyone at the place I was at thought I was writing a book, because I'd be writing every day. So they kept giving me their address, like, can you send me a copy of your book when you're done? And I wasn't writing a book. I was just trying to like just let my brain you know, forget about everything for a little bit. But
Well, that's the nice thing about writing.
mhm,
It kind of helps you to sharpen your thoughts.
yeah,
At least that's how I felt about it. I didn't want it. I thought about, what I had in mind to write a blog and so on. I have a little blog right now, but it's not the same as writing a book.
mm,
You do way more research, and you think so much more about what you want to put on paper, because it's going to last. And a blog can be taken down any second.
yeah,
It's probably not that. And also people just skip through blogs. They don't really read it, but they sit down and read books.
yeah.
And the way how you make sentences is, there's a certain art and flow to it, which I was very fascinated by. So I think it's a huge difference to write a book, or even just to sharpen your sense and bring your thoughts on paper. It's a great process for your mind.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And for you, so you decided to self-publish. Sorry, I'm kind of going off topic here, but I guess I'm fascinated by this. But so you went, because that's one thing too, is that over the last 10, 15 years, I've had a lot of people come to me about writing books, but it's always been like from publishers, and it's always been technical books, which I had zero interest in doing. Just I don't want to write like a how to blow stuff up book. It just never has interested me. And I had at one stage here and there talked about, okay, well, what kind of profits would I make from writing a book? And every single time they would dodge the question. But eventually when we did get into it, it's just like, okay, like obviously, this is such a huge process that especially for a technical book, because I would look at it from the perspective of that kind of subject is a very limited audience rather than other ones. So for me,
it's very limited.
Yeah.
If you publish a book in visual effects, it's about the subject of visual effects, you're not going to get rich of it.
Yeah.
No matter if it's a technical book or the book like mine, it's a very limited audience, which is why the price is a little bit higher.
Sure.
And you're not going to get rich of it.
But you do it for passion. You do it because it's something.
Exactly. I did it for closure.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to find out these things. And I wanted to get closure at the same time. So I wanted just to wrap these things up. I wanted to get these thoughts out of my head. Mm-hmm. And to me, the book was the process of doing that. And having this all behind me now, I feel very peaceful, actually.
That's one thing I wanted to ask, actually, was what was it like? Like, what was the reaction when you put out this book? Only because, obviously, this is such a big and also opinionated subject. So I'm just kind of curious, like, when you announced this, when you put it out, like, was there much backlash, or were people really supportive?
Yeah. The first 2 weeks I got a lot of hate mail.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite one was from "Not for your sale, you whore," something like that. And what did it say? It said something like that I'm making money on the hard work of people, and that I should put out the work for free or whatever. And something like that. Someone who clearly doesn't understand how economics work.
Yeah. They should read the book.
Yeah. So and that changed after 2 weeks. So the first 2 weeks when I put out the book was very hard, because I got all this negative feedback. And even on there's this one site called Goodreads. That was actually the first review I got. I put it up on Goodreads and I said, "Mark me," and I got a 1-star review. I was like, "Oh no!" And I said, "What was wrong?" And so that was my early feedback. But that changed. So now I get so much feedback from people who actually like it. From company owners, even big software company owners, who say that they really loved and enjoy my work, and that they thank me for putting it out there, and that finally there's someone writing about the business and putting the numbers out, that people can have now much better educated discussion about the industry. So now I feel much, much better.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but I mean, usually the people that give the negative feedback, you're going to get them first, just because they're the ones who see something and they impulsively want to write to you and tell you, like, this is all fucked up and you're a whore, you're a sellout, whatever. And then everyone else is the ones who are actually interested, are the ones who actually go and they read it, absorb it, and then give their thoughts, rather than the ones who just don't read it, they just instantly start typing and trolling and doing that stuff.
It's very fascinating. I mean, the book, from the feedback I can see, was read by some very high profile people, and they like it.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so I feel very, very blessed in a way, because I couldn't wish for more. If these top, industry guys who are in the industry for 30, 40 years. I mean, I have two quotes on the front of my book, and you have Scott Ross and Michael Pangrazio, who both are, stars in visual effects, and they liked it. So, I feel very blessed that that they like it, and that, I got to get a sense of approval from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I haven't heard from Joe Leterrier anyway.
Maybe he's still, it's.
But he's still reading it.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually going to mention before, when it came to publishing, like Tim Ferriss, when he put out the 4-Hour Chef, like that was the first book to go through Amazon's new publishing, and because of that, like Barnes and Noble and all these other traditional publishers, traditional bookstores were all boycotting the book, just to try and like send a message. And I love that, because I mean, it's, it looks at the whole book publishing industry and how it's is going through this adaptation. And I kind of look at it like iTunes or anything else, like digital music. The ones who adapt are the ones that profit, and everyone else who stays the same is gonna fall behind. But I remember that he had a bit of a rant once about kind of crazy people and all the trolling and abusive stuff that he'd receive. And it was basically, if you picture like the online community being like a massive city, if you've got like hundreds of thousands or millions of people out there, which essentially is the population of a big city, then typically in any city there's going to be a small percentage of people who are batshit crazy, and all they do is they take pride and fun in just writing abusive crap or trolling people.
These trolling guys, people, I don't understand them. I had them on my blog on the comment section, and I really don't understand them.
Yeah.
I mean, you put yourself out there, and they just, I hate you.
Yeah. I mean, but that's what I mean. Like, you're definitely gonna always have a few people like that. I haven't had that for a long time, but I know earlier in my time, I definitely had like a lot of crazy stuff, good and bad, just kind of come my way from people saying, like, there's a girl from Ubisoft who wanted to live with me for 6 months just to learn 3D better, or and kids wanting to name their children, just like random stuff. But then you have like the opposite, which is like, people who are got nothing better to do than say crazy stuff. And now you kind of get to a point where you almost expect it, even when you're not doing it. You always wonder about, like, okay, whatever I do, what is going to be the backlash for doing it?
Yeah, it took me a while, but now I start to see the funny side of things.
Yes, that's exactly it. Like,
it gets entertaining.
That's exactly it. For me now, it's more about like, cool. Like, I'm privileged to see that you're taking your spare time to even pay attention. But I mean, Scott Ross, like, how did, like, obviously he wrote a big foreword for you as well as everything on the back. I mean, how did that come to be, like, with him doing the contribution for the front of the book?
Yeah, that was pure luck. A friend of mine knew him, because I never worked for him, or I never met him in my life. But a friend of mine did. He worked for him, and I asked him to kind of introduce us. And Scott Ross is, he is really dedicated to the visual effects industry, and so I got introduced via email, and I sent the book to him, and I asked him for feedback, and if he would, maybe share a blurb for my book. And then he said, I would love to talk to you about it, because I think it's great, but, maybe I can add a few things here and there. So, we had a conversation which ended up to be 2.5 hours long or so, and it was just awesome. This guy, he really knows the industry inside out, and it was a super fascinating conversation, and
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, and then he wrote the foreword for me.
That's great. Actually, I'm curious, like, how did it feel when you finally got this book out? And again, I think this is the me nerding out about the book creation side of it, but
it was like losing a child, I guess. My wife always said, it's your baby. It's your baby. And when it was out, I always laughed at her. It's not my baby. But when it was out, it felt like losing a child. I mean, now it's out in the world, and I detach myself of the book a little. But yeah, it feels like losing something, to be honest, because it's, before I had something to do always, I went home and I did it. And now it's, I come home and, I can watch TV. I have something called freedom.
Yeah, you can turn on the TV and watch
I can watch TV, which was, by the way, the hardest thing during the writing process, not to be able to go out and, have party all the time. There were many times where I just, stayed home and wrote. pretty
Yeah.
much. So it is quite of a sacrifice. If you start writing, taking on a book project seriously, it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, a lot of discipline, to see it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the big problem in the Kindle world, with Kindle publishing, because some people tell me, that, oh, your book is so expensive. I would love to buy it, but it's so expensive. Most of the money goes towards Amazon, and the rest goes towards the government. So I think I get, a couple of percent after taxes. I was talking about, that people were complaining that it's so expensive. Oh yeah, now I know. And so the main thing is that people were reluctant to buy it in the beginning because it was slightly priced higher than the average Amazon book, which sells for something like $1.99 or $9.99 or whatever. But what most people don't realize is that the most books are not as research intensive.
Yeah.
Most books just take maybe 3 months to write, if at all. So most of these Amazon books who sell for 99 cents or $1.99 or free even are not even 100 pages long.
Most ebooks that people put out on Kindle, usually someone writes them in about a week, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's more of a business of like quantity over quality. And what you're talking about is both a book that you contributed for 4 years, did all the research, but then on top of that,
I also paid for
industry.
editing.
Yeah.
And I paid for editing and proofreading and whatnot. And this stuff is not cheap. It's kind of like the cost, what it does cost to put a book out in the world. A publisher would have spent the exact same money. He would have just taken in the end a much bigger cut.
Yeah.
Actually, he would have paid me for the work. He would have paid me something I would have probably made in a month doing visual effects work, and that's it. So all I'm left with is the pride and the fame.
That's right.
Being a published author, not even a best-selling author, just a published guy.
Well, I don't even know what the book costs, because for me it was more like impulsively, I'm like, this is great, like this is something that's going to benefit me, and in the long run, whether it's $10 or whether it's $20, it's still something that is going to benefit me a lot more than a couple of coffees that I might have to buy at Starbucks for that week.
Yeah. Well, that's what in the end I'm getting. I get it. You buy me lunch. If you buy my book, you buy me lunch pretty much.
We'll back pay the lunches that it costs to make the book in the first place.
But yeah, I mean, it was still worth it. I would still do it all again.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Actually, when we talk about proofing, and this will be the last one I'll ask about. I mentioned about this, but I've got a friend that I work with occasionally, Neil Strauss, who is a 7 times New York Times bestselling author. He's written like Jenna Jameson's autobiography, Marilyn Manson's. He wrote The Game, Emergency, all these other great books. And one thing is because he's more secretive about his publishing process, he'll get he'll let people come in and proof his books, but they'll have to do it right in front of him. So he'll get them to all read like a portion of the book each and go through it. So I think it's a lot more work to do, but I mean everyone has their process. But yeah, I mean he's famous. I guess that's people are burning to read his stuff. But it is kind of interesting to see how everyone acts differently. But I mean, with your book, you again. The case studies, a lot of these, the films that you talk about are ones that I'm very familiar with and kind of geeked out about when I was very young, following. So, I mean, it's really great to kind of have that nostalgic revisiting of them. But you cover a lot of case studies about the productions and also, like Cleopatra, I didn't know that the whole dilemma with that one. So, I mean, is really educational too. But is there any ones that for you stood out, like when you were researching it and writing it? As like your favorite case study out of all of these in terms of the process or what went on?
Well, I think it was actually Cleopatra and Titanic.
One thing I loved about Titanic, so the North Atlantic seagulls was that I think actually I had laughing out loud about because just to see, because you see that occasionally where someone is so adamant about doing 1,100 revisions on a film, or in this case about something that's so insignificant, but it can cost so much to make these changes, and you need to really ask yourself like whether or not they are substantial changes that are worth it.
It is obsession.
Yeah,
I've seen it so many times that supervisors and I obviously don't have that much directors interaction, but I see it on supervisors that they get obsessed with certain details in a shot that they start to lose sight on the whole picture. So they're focusing in certain corners, which you think, actually it's all right, but look at that big mess on the upper right corner,
Yeah.
But they don't see it anymore. And yeah, it's, I guess that's the danger of doing visual effects. You start to get obsessed with details, and you have to ask yourself, what the average person in the cinema do? Obviously, you have to make the director happy, and so your customer, but you also have to make the client, the ultimate client happy, which is obviously the audience.
Yeah.
So, and I always ask myself, would the audience give a fuck when they see that your pixel is not that great or not that big or whatever? Most of the times they don't. And and then I ask myself, is it really worth to do that free overtime right now?
Yeah, yeah.
And that thought really drives you nuts.
Actually, there's a website which I'm sure you're familiar with. Used to be around, isn't anymore, but VFX Hell. And,
oh yeah, right. I remember.
I remember during Superman Returns, like Rhythm and Hughes is working on it, Sony's working on it. I was tied to that movie for a year and a half. I worked on set filming at Fox Studios in Sydney as a liaison between Warner Brothers and Frantic Films, and then research and development, pre-production in Canada, and then later on in LA for finaling the film. And I just remember throughout that movie there was a common thread being put on VFX Hell from every studio, which was, is this movie worth it? Because people were going through divorces, people were having health issues, there were all these things coming up, and that was just something that, like, people were like, it's a fucking movie, like, is it worth,
Exactly, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be fun, and that's what the industry these days forgets. It's just about crunching out shots faster. Not really better anymore, it's just faster, do it faster.
Yeah.
Do it different.
Faster means cheaper as well, so.
Of course.
But,
be cheap and be fast.
For you, like we kind of talked about this before we started, but I'd love your take on this. I mean, I think that one of the things, and this is a reoccurring theme for me, that artists really need to adapt is to get more of a business mindset, to start to treat themselves as a contractor, as a business, as their own entity, because that way they can protect themselves more, they can stand up for themselves, and they actually understand the process of how this whole thing works, so that way they can make the decisions about whether or not, like, they're being ripped off or...
Well, if I have a problem with this industry or with the mindset that's kind of common in the industry, then it's that most people are watching out for the big savior. The VS is supposed to do something, or if the VS is not doing, then somebody should do a union, on a global scale. Somebody should do something. Visual effects soldier, please save us. Someone has to save us. And the easiest way to save the industry is to save yourself. Actually, it's that simple. Just take care of yourself, take care of your family, and ask yourself better questions. Is it really worth it what you're doing? Everybody of us does sacrifices. You sacrifice always something, and you have to ask yourself, is what you are sacrificing really worth it? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not.
One of the big wake-up calls for me was that we work in this crazy industry where, again, like, we don't necessarily make any savings, we work ourselves to death, and we're working such crazy hours. And for me, I'm always like, I'll take care of my health later, I'll take care of everything else later. So obviously, eating pasta, Indian food, pizza, everything else, like, everyone's putting on weight, everyone's sitting for...
Pop the fuck up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, I just find it really fascinating for me that I've definitely had these times where, like, I would go into health issues, and I'm like, yeah, like, it's expected of me, like, I'll do 6 months of non-stop 7-day weeks, and then I know that as soon as, because I've done it extensively, 150-hour weeks, where I know that as soon as I sleep or I have, like, a day off, my body's like, okay, great, time to break down and get sick, because it will endure to the point where you give it a chance to let up. And I'll always schedule that in, like, okay, I'm going to do all this overtime, I'm going to work my butt off, and then I'm going to be sick for 2 weeks afterwards. And if you do the math, those 2 weeks, all the overtime, it's pretty much the equivalent of, like, what you would have been paid in that 2 weeks you're going to be sick. So it's not exactly like, oh, I got to go on vacation and enjoy some time with my family. It's like, no, like, your body is just trying to play catch up and repair all the damage you've done. And
I mean, for a traditional film crew on set, it's the exact same case. They just get paid way more. They spend 2 weeks on a set, and they know they're just going to be there day in and day out, and you know, spending their nights and sleeping on the set and so on. They're gonna bill hefty for that, and they have a union, of course, you know, to make sure that they're gonna get paid well. We don't have that. But then again, you know, it brings me back to the union subject. Yeah, a union would be great, but we don't have one. So, you know, take care of yourself, and if you know that you're gonna burn out, and even if you don't burn out, if you know you're just going to be wasted for 3 weeks, then, you know, just factor it into your bill.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I did a project about 2 years ago as a commercial God of War. It was for the Super Bowl, and like, I freaking loved it. It was, for me, probably one of my favorite projects to date, and I killed myself on it, but I've never ever had any back issues, and then that project, I should have gone to hospital. I just kept living at work and getting through it because I was in charge of it. I was in charge of my team, and I had to, you know, represent the project and make sure I'm meeting with the director, everyone else seeing the project through. So I was just getting like worse and worse and worse because I needed to have a break because I had 2 herniations in my spine, and I was going through the worst pain I've ever had. And the thing was that I kept thinking, you know, I'll take care of myself when this project's done. And finally, after, you know, brute force going through it all, after that I had permanent injuries that took me a year to just recover to the point where, you know, you're going to be in pain the rest of your life, but you're able to actually walk and function and be healthy again. And for me, that was like, it changed my entire life, my philosophy, and it's always been now, like, health comes first, because you think that, okay, I'll worry about my health later, whatever it's going to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be your back or anything else, but the thing is, over time, you think, all right, well, I'll get through all my projects and then I'll worry about my health. The thing is, if your health goes to shit, you can't work, you can't do anything, and on top of that, you're going to have like a lot of medical bills and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
So you know, your health needs to, like, you're a machine, you're a robot that needs to function, and if you don't, then everything is going to break down. So the more you neglect those simple things that we all think that we can live forever and do it all, but in the end, when that breaks down, then like everything else goes with it. So it's,
well, I mean, we also have to remind ourselves that it's possible to die of exhaustion at work. And it's so common in Japan that they even have a word for that.
yeah.
I forgot the word, but they, you know, it just happens that they die while they're working, and it is possible. Just because our work is not physical, it doesn't mean it's not, you know, it doesn't finish you off. You know, you burn out quite easily if you do spend these hours on working on a show. And yeah, I think you have, it's very important to take care of yourself, of your body. And I started that too late as well. I think I killed myself on Avatar. I gained so much weight. I mean, Weta has awesome, it's really good, very tasty and very carb heavy. So I think I gained 10 kilos. They really made it well, but man, I gained so much. And of course you don't move much, right? Because you're just spending all these hours in front of the computer.
Plus the stress and everything else that
plus the stress, exactly. Yeah, it took me a year to recover from it.
That's awesome. And a couple other things. I mean, this is more stuff that we were talking about earlier, but you would mention there's a lot of mistakes that artists make, and I know out of context it might be hard to remember what you were mentioning earlier, but I mean, can you think of what are common things more to do with when they go into the industry and, you know, when they're taking on jobs, whatever it is, but what are the common things that they may run into in terms of obviously taking on jobs for a cheaper price, but I mean...
Well, yeah, the biggest problem is how you start out, and that all depends on your background. If you start with a degree from a university, or you maybe have a debt, a student loan or something to pay off, and the way I see it, this is not beneficial in the industry like this, because the recruiter who's going to hire you looks at the school and he knows what he's billing you, and he will factor that into his, you know, his bid for you. In the end, so he doesn't give a shit about how awesome your reel looks, because if the reel would be shit, he wouldn't even talking to you. So you have something of value in that moment, but with that student loan on your back, he knows that you have pressure. You have the pressure, or the student has the pressure to find work within probably 2 years, and he will utilize that for his negotiations. So this is a huge disadvantage, I think, that people have who come from schools with a student loan.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
if you're starting out like I did, just self-education from DVDs or your website, for example, it's way cheaper, it's way more efficient, and the company will see that you don't finish off with a nice degree, and you will have a negotiation advantage in that second.
Yeah.
And I think it is a mistake to start out for free. It's always a mistake, because
Yes.
if you can't get a paid job, I think that's a sign that your skills are not at the level the company needs. It actually means that they don't value your time. They have no value for your time. That's how you should see it, and you should look for someone who does. I think the biggest mistake people do is that they, if they want to break into the industry, that they apply for Weta, or I'm not even saying that Weta plays this game, but maybe they apply at ILM, all these typical dream places to work at, and obviously you may just be able to break in there if you underprice yourself, but there are lots of smaller places out there who may be not that famous, but they do some great work, who would maybe value your time more than the big company who gets lots and lots of applications.
That's actually a good point, and that was the next question I was going to ask is what would you think, like what would be advice you would give when you're first starting out your career? And I will just add to what you're saying about, for me, my advice is always when you're starting your career to start out at a smaller studio, usually in commercials. And the reason for that is because, if you're working on commercials, let's say, usually they're going to be very cutthroat. You're going to need to be more of a generalist because you might specialize, but typically you're going to still need to do a lot of everything. And the best thing is that it exposes you to a lot of different areas. But on top of that, 1 year at a smaller studio, doing 2-week turnarounds on every project, you're going to end up with 10, 20 projects on your reel. And your reel, when you first start out, is going to, like your initial reel that got you that first job, it's going to look like shit because it's basically all of your own personal work. And as soon as you go into a production environment where you're being paid and you have time to work on something that's really polished, really good, plus a team of other people who are all working together to make something look fucking amazing, that's when your whole reel is going to change. You're going to have something that the production quality, the production value is so much higher. And because of that, you've got a whole new reel. And if you go work on like a big production, where let's say Happy Feet or something like that, where you're on that for 3 years, and at the end of the day you might end up with some snow or something. I use that analogy because I'd worked for years before that, but like I was going to go work. We were talking this earlier, but I was going to go work at Animalogic at one point on Happy Feet as a lead, and I decided last minute to move to LA and start like working out here instead. And I looked back actually during the Oscars. I was with a friend of mine who was a senior lighter at Sony, and we were sitting there watching the Oscars. His movie Monster House was up against Happy Feet, and I unfortunately was Superman Returns against Pirates of the Caribbean 2, so I was fucked. There's no way I was gonna win. But it made me kind of look back at, okay, Happy Feet is up for an Oscar. Like, did I make the right decision with like moving out to LA? I went to work on Blade, and then I went to work on maybe 20 other films, or let's say 10 other films, and it made me think that, okay, over 3 or 4 years, I got to do all these other things. Whereas, and if I were, let's say, a junior starting out, what I would have on my reel at the end of 3 years would be nothing but like a bunch of snowflakes or whatever that were revised to 400 versions. And so I think the fastest way to fast track your career is to do commercials in the beginning. But what's your opinion? Like, what would be some advice you would give to people when, especially, actually, obviously reading your book would be a great one, but initially starting out, like, what would be some key things that you've learned over your career that you could say, hey, this is going to save you a few years of pain to know?
Well, my career was a little unusual because I started out in games, and I learned all the game kind of things, how the game industry works and so on and so forth. And then I went over to CGI animated movies, and I did exactly what you described. I was just working on doing snow and rain and water, and I had ownership of a smaller amount of the picture. And after that, I did commercials, and that was the best move I ever done to actually up my career, because you'd end up doing a lot of things. I became more of a generalist. On the CGI movie, I was more like an effects TD, I mean, they weren't even called back in the days effects CDs. I was called Particle Pierre. That was my title.
Wow.
It took me years to find out that it's called effects animation, and then once I called myself an effects animator, everybody called himself an effects TD. So I was always late on that train. But anyways, so the best move was always doing the commercial thing, and I learned on the commercials to do everything, like how to light, how to shade, and how to render things, and of course the effects background helped tremendously, because as an effects CD you have to be more of a generalist. I think you're an effects CD as well.
Yeah.
Or at least your background is. So you just automatically have to have a deeper understanding of the package. So if you're starting out as an effects technical director, that's probably that's the biggest hardcore way to enter the industry you can think of.
Yeah.
So it might not be the road for everyone, but I don't even think they have that, right? They just have generalists in commercials.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like some places now I think have gotten to the point where they're big enough that they will have that structure. But if you're at a small studio as 20 people, then I think it's better, because I think starting there, you may have a focus, like, I want to do effects, but you're going to have a good understanding how everything works. And it means that later on, when you're working in effects, not only your job, but like, okay, I need to prepare what I'm doing a certain way, so that way the next person to move on to this is able to do their job. Rather than if you just know effects and you've done nothing but effects your entire life, then you might just be spitting out, here's my particle rig, have fun, instead of like, okay, I need to cash it all out and give a clean element with UVs and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever it's going to be. And compositing, all that stuff. Like, the more you understand the process, the better you're going to do. And that leads into understanding what a producer does. The more you educate yourself on their job, the more you're learning, the big picture, and you're able to work better with what you're doing.
I completely agree, and you also get faster if you work on commercials.
Yes.
You are forced to work under very short time schedules, and in an industry like that, that's very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Actually, that was the biggest reason why back in the day DNEG gave a shot on me, because they saw that I come from a commercial world, and so my film reel was already outdated by then. They just hired me because I came from commercials, and they said that was a proof that I'm able to work in a fast-paced environment.
That's awesome. I think that's really cool. I think that's definitely a good point to make, and I think that the more places that think like that, the better, because it means that you're not nursing shots for 6 months. You have like a 2-week turnaround for several shots, and you need to be able to jump around, in some cases multitask with your role in a job. So I think that's great.
I agree.
And this is going to be the big one. I mean, obviously PDI DreamWorks this week closed down. So I mean, you wrote an article yesterday about that, yesterday afternoon. And what's your opinion on the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad. And in a way, I'm surprised that I'm actually surprised, to be honest, because it's, if you think about it, it was weird that they had 2 facilities in California anyways.
Yeah.
And so their overhead must have been massive. And then, of course, there's the subsidy thing going on in Canada. Plus, I suspect that any artist in Canada is probably half as expensive as the one even without subsidies, as the one in California. So, and if you think about, that they can outsource the project to Canada for half the wage cost plus subsidies, that's a win-win, and that facility. So, I mean, that's a pretty good deal while they start to restructure. I think they are just in a very dire situation, because they are, in a way, they're not diversified enough.
Yeah.
I think, if I understand it right, they are separated out from the DreamWorks film unit.
Yeah, they're still PDI, which surprises me that they are separate studios, but essentially they are still considered, we're PDI. That's what we do with Ants and Shrek and everything else.
Yeah. Unlike Disney, who is very diversified in all sorts of direction, DreamWorks Animation is not, and they just were very unfortunate with a lot of unsuccessful movies.
Probably more speculation at this point, but do you think that the main reason that they had this massive crash and had to close is because they had so many IPs that they were focusing on, but rather than having any that had a major return in terms of investment? Like, do you think that the main reason they've gone into this situation was just not having anything really bankable that they could come out on top
Yeah.
with?
Well, the way I see it is that to have many IPs is just a diversification strategy. The problem was that the many IPs that they had were unsuccessful. I watched the last Dragon
Yeah, that was
movie.
great.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it was great. It was visually great, but I wasn't emotionally attached. It was, I was fascinated that I saw the biggest visual that I've ever seen in an animated movie, but I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
And so I think the writing was just not so good. But in hindsight, you can say many things. The facts are that they just had too many unsuccessful IPs. I don't think that the IP is the problem. That they were betting on IPs. I think that's stupid. That they are owning the IPs is the only reason why they're still around. But they are not a film studio. They are film production.
That's right.
And that's the problem. I mean, they just had too many unsuccessful movies, so they're shrinking down and they restructure. I think this is just very normal. But many people are saying that they're not outsourcing to India because India is maybe not the quality level that the Western studio is. And I think this is. I worked in Singapore, and I tell you, these guys are just as good as we are. And they are able to crank. I mean, if they are not now, they soon will be able to crank out this. At least on the animation side of things, they will be able to crank out the same quality shots.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen phenomenal work coming from many different cities all over the world. I've got a lot of students who are from everywhere from Vietnam through India, through Canada, US, Australia, everywhere, and like. To say that like one country cannot do what the other one is total bullshit.
I think so too.
I think 10 years ago, there was definitely a bit of a disconnect where people from LA had the experience, and I think experience is actually. I heard a great quote the other day, which was, "The greatest teacher you can have is experience," which right away I'm like, I'm fucking writing that down because that's so accurate. And but over time, I mean, we've been doing this all for a long time now, and I think that the experience part's catching up. And Singapore, for instance, is doing a large majority of Avengers too, and a lot of other projects. So,
well, I mean, the Strange Magic movie, they did all on their own. And I think it looks great. And there you go. They have artists from Malaysia. They have them from India. Lots of them from India. They have them from Singapore. I don't know. Pretty much all over Asia they come there. And when they're finished up in Singapore because they think, oh, it's an expensive city, I go home. They bring that knowledge with them. So you are just betting on time really. If India is not ready to deliver the qualities LA needs now, they're going to be in 2 years. And,
that's right.
But that's what I wrote in my article. India is not owned by DreamWorks. So I think the commitment from DreamWorks to India is not that as high as it is to Beijing. So I think their main bet is with Beijing.
Yeah.
They're going to produce Kung Fu Panda 3 there, and 1/3 is going to be produced fully there, and it has to be fully produced in Beijing, otherwise they cannot get the movie into China. So and I know that they are hiring some very talented Western artists, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna get these Asian artists, if they're not now, soon up to speed, and they will. You won't see the difference in the cinema. I'm pretty sure. You won't tell the difference what came out of China, what came out of San Francisco. And I just wanted to say it's already the case with that in Avengers. I mean, you look at Avengers and you won't know what happened in Singapore or in San Francisco or Pacific Rim, the movie I worked on. You won't tell the difference.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it's a good thing that they don't share the same pipeline in Beijing. And I think it's a good thing that they don't have the same pipeline as they do in San Francisco, because DreamWorks is an old company. They're probably carrying around a lot of legacy software, and I think a fresh start is actually very positive.
Yeah, I don't hear too many people say that, but that's always been kind of my philosophy, is that you've got studios like Rhythm Hughes, Digital Domain, ILM, a lot of studios who've been doing this forever and have been in a lot of ways pioneering the industry, and they're amazing at what they do. However, because of that, they're still following the process that they were doing a lot younger, and they adapt and grow, but it's still, it's not, for me, like being at ILM, like I remember having meetings where they were discussing maybe introducing Houdini into the pipeline, and there was a very big discussion, rather than being like, you know what, this is amazing software, let's try it out. But I find that studios that are younger or smaller, they're gonna more look at, you know, let's do things the most practical way, rather than this is how we've done it for the past 10 years. So having a fresh start can be really beneficial, just because you have, you know, more reason to adapt new technology, new approaches, do things maybe a little bit more quicker, you know, than you might have done in the past. So,
and I think that's the secret of Weta, because they always do a fresh start. It really is.
I wanted, you know, I was going to bring that up, and I'm like, yeah, I'll leave that alone. But that, honestly, for me, is where I've always felt Weta was able to kind of come out of nowhere and take over the industry, was the fact that they had the bandwidth to do something amazing, but rather than it being the kind of dinosaur approach of the, you know, historical way of doing things, they were able to come out with a bunch of amazing artists from all over the world and say, okay, we need to build a pipeline, we need to build tech, we need to go about this, let's go start from scratch and do it. And I think that's a key thing that made Weta so strong, is because they were able to starting from scratch, rehash like the old way of doing things into how do we do it better. If we were starting out from scratch, how do we do it now? Take all the experience you had and be able to hit the ground running on something bigger and more powerful.
Yeah, they are more concerned about the picture than the way how they're gonna get to the picture. And that's I always like that way about Weta. And yeah, unfortunately, other companies are not like that. For them, it's more like, you know, technical masturbation. You know, how do we get this done? Oh, that's very clever. I think you should get a promotion.
I just had to look, because I got invited to a visual effects, like VES Society private screening of How to Train Your Dragon 2, which is on Monday night, and I can't make it. However, I just wanted to look on there to see who is actually speaking on the panel, and because I thought it'd be great, considering everything going on, it might be really interesting to see who are the speakers, you know, in terms of visual effects. And I think this is one of the first times I've seen a VES screening. You know, typically it's the director, the visual effects supervisor, and a couple other core people. And this one, it seems like it's all the talent. It's all the actors doing all the voiceovers, doing the panel. Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering, like, out of curiosity, whether that, you know, I'm kind of...
that seems to be a political move.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether it was like a last minute thing, like let's pull the jaded people off and put some other people on and just do the standard PR. You know, yeah. I mean, I did a interview with a friend of mine earlier in the week. We were talking about this, and it kind of came up a few days earlier that, oh yeah, end of the week, apparently DreamWorks is meant to close. And at the time, you know, I was kind of like, okay, well, that'll be interesting. Then it actually did happen. I'm like, fuck, okay, well, I guess they'd been playing that for a few days, because it seemed like a lot of people knew about it. But
the thing is, they're still restructuring. I don't think they're done. I mean, I don't know if they fire more, but they're certainly not done restructuring.
Yeah.
At least that's what Wall Street thinks. And, you know, just imagine they have another flop. I don't know what's going to happen.
Then Prana or Prime Focus will step in and put them onto their massive list of acquisitions.
But I'm pretty sure they're going to be more careful about the next movie they're going to put out. There were some movies from them where I'm sure they didn't thought much about, you know, why the hell are, you know, they're doing it. Like this snail movie.
A couple other things, we'll start to wrap it up, but I guess it kind of leads into a question I had earlier, but like taking away the negative feedback, I mean, what's happened since you've released the book? Like, what was the whole experience like?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have reached out to me, and there's some things that some people I have to get connect to, because I'm very slow with these things. But I can tell you that the Canadian people don't seem to be very interested in the book. The most positive feedback I get is from Americans, Germans, and Australians, actually. So
great.
Yeah. So this, they don't. I don't know what their thoughts are. Maybe they don't like the message. I think there's a big misunderstanding, because the book doesn't really have a message. It's just a very analytical approach or view or perspective how the industry really is at its current time. It's, you know, if you want, it's a snapshot at the industry of the past and how it is now. And I pulled myself completely out of it. You can just read it and then make up your own mind. You know, learn from it or don't learn from it. It's completely up to you.
Yeah, my take on your book is that it's something that by reading it you're going to get a lot more educated about everything that goes on in this industry, and I think it's very important to read up and find out these things. Otherwise, you know,
Yeah.
everything you hear, it's going to be hearsay and you don't really understand it. But this is a chance to kind of get a better understanding about the industry you're in, so that way you
Yeah.
can make up your own mind about everything that
But
that goes
to
on.
me, it's you have to learn the rules to play the game, and I think this book kind of explains to you the rules. And it doesn't teach you the game, you know, it doesn't tell you what to do. But you know, now that you're aware of a lot of things, you can make strategic decisions,
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
will have definitely effect on your future, I
And
think.
with Canada, like I'll clarify, and I'm sure you can add to this, but you know, anything that you or I have said about Canada isn't a negative thing at all. It's more to do with the fact that you know, and this goes into your book as well. Like, if people aren't responding as much to your book in Canada, let's say, that's more because right now, if you're in a city that's really booming with work and
Yeah.
where all the work's going, then it's kind of like a gold rush, and you're reading about the depression on the other side of the world. You know, you might hear a bit about it, but you're probably not going to care as much because it's not affecting you. And definitely a big focal point on the industry right now. There's
Yeah.
a lot of work that's fluctuated there. It doesn't necessarily mean that
No, no, no,
I'm going to
I
Canada
know
where the
what
gold
you
rush
mean.
is, or I'm going to make it rich, but it's more about, okay, well, there's stability right now in what, you know, what's going on there. Not necessarily meaning that high pay or anything like that, but more, okay, if you go out there to freelance, you're not necessarily going to need to jump
Wes, I
from,
mean, nobody's losing their jobs right now.
yeah,
But it's who knows what's going to happen as soon as the
exactly.
subsidies get cut by 1%.
And I've seen that in Vancouver before, because like video games has been a very big industry there, and I've never seen, like, I was talking with the guys from Activision the other day about this, and I've never seen this before, which fascinated me. Was I was at a video game company up there for a little bit, and they had to lay off 150 people, which was pretty normal at the time. Like, game studios, typically what happened is one game studio closes, and a majority of those people then go and launch several new game studios, and it's kind of the fluctuation, like the ebb and flow of the video game industry, especially in Vancouver. But I've never seen companies so aggressively recruit, where they were going to lay off 150 people at the studio. What happened is you would get Rockstar Video Games would pay people to go and spray paint on the front pavement the recruiting website for their company, and every, like, there's a train station not far from there, every like wall leading up to there would be their hiring thing, so that way you should come work for our company. Then obviously other companies are throwing parties, and others are paying internally people at that company to give out all their email addresses, so then they could privately invite every single person from the company to come out to their studio for like a meet and greet party. And like, I've never seen that, because I do find there's a bit more of a respect in the visual effects side of the world, or at least there was, where you know, you would never just blatantly go and put a sign outside of a building like, you guys are getting laid off, you should come to our company, because that's just kind of like kicking someone when they're down. And so that blew my mind that I'd even see that kind of stuff go on. But you know, I do think that with any company, there's going to be those sporadic moments where people gain a lot, and then
There's still this rumor that in Canada there's a shortage of visual effects workers. I've never been to Canada, but I highly doubt that. I cannot imagine that there's really a shortage of visual effects workers. I mean, the schools are pushing out so many artists, and there's so many friends from me who went over, relocated to Vancouver. It feels to me like actually the whole industry is gathering right there.
Yeah.
And to me, the game is pretty simple. I mean, if you kind of create that illusion that there is really a shortage of workers, you know, you're obviously going to attract a lot of artists. I'll not say the word workers. So if there's
designers.
designers, yeah. So if there's a lot of supply, I'm not even using the word oversupply, but if there's a lot of supply, you can suppress the price of that service.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what they're trying to play right now. They're trying to lure more people into Canada, and to control, in order to control the price. You know, it's pretty much it's that simple. I don't believe that there's a shortage, not at all.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And also, and if there's a shortage, why does everybody just get a 1-year contract there? or 6 months or whatever? Is it because of the subsidies maybe stop in 6 months or 1 year or 2 years?
That's an interesting thing to hear, is like whether there are people getting staff positions with medical and everything else, or are they all...
What are the good staff positions exactly?
Yeah.
Long-term contracts, where are they?
Yeah.
Where's the stability? To me, I believe the stability if the contract gives you healthcare, pension plan, a long-term perspective, maybe even a career path. I don't hear these things.
That's actually a really interesting thing. I mean, the very first episode I did of this podcast was about how to make a successful freelance career and how to take care of yourself. Think more like a business, but more about like ways to find work, to get your name out there, to network and everything else. But it was an interesting thing about like after that, about people, you know, it's kind of unheard of in visual effects now to have staff positions. It just doesn't really exist right now. No. And it's scary because like a lot of people are like, oh, I want staff, but like no, you know, nowhere's really giving out jobs like that. At least, you know, video games, stuff like that, yes, because the turnaround's 2 to 3, 4 years per project. But feature films, like midway through the project, it could get pulled or outsourced or anything else.
Oh yeah, easily. And again, I mean, nobody knows how long the subsidies are going to last in Canada. And as far as I know, there were some news out where they announced some cuts. I think I bet there's some, you know, I don't know, there's someone fighting to keep these subsidies around because, oh no, if they go, you know, the jobs will be done and the visual effects industry is going to die and nobody's going to do movies again. You know, I'm sure that's the mantra they're going to play again. Again, I think the ultimate, you know, do you know what Australia does to kind of get the healthcare cost under control?
It's kind of similar to Canada. Both Canada and Australia, in a lot of ways, are very similar, and we have a higher tax bracket. You know, so we are paying more, but there is a lot more stability. So it's a little bit more expensive to live in those countries, but you know, we pay for medical, we pay for everything. So exactly,
but what I don't think, and the government says of Australia says that there's a shortage of nurses.
Oh yeah.
But I don't think there's a shortage of nurses. In Australia, but they still gonna put them on the list because Australia is one of the toughest countries to immigrate to, right? So, but nurses have it very easy, and it is the only purpose why they have it easy is to control the cost of healthcare. So, if they get a lot of nurses, you know, into the country, it means that the price of healthcare goes down and doctors and whatnot. So it just makes sense to get a lot of them in there because it's to the benefit of everyone. And in Canada, to me, it's the same game. You know, just you know, make this illusion that we have a shortage of visual effects workers. People come from school, do the work, and then in 2-3 years, as soon as the subsidies are gone, we're gonna kick you out again onto the street.
That's an interesting way to approach it because I'd never, up until now, I never really thought about it like that. But if you make a big illusion of undersupply, so that way you're essentially creating like by having having a high in demand area, low supply, everyone is going to fluctuate to that area, and then from there it's like, you know what, we have such an oversupply of people that, you know, everyone's a dime a dozen, so we can, you know, drop rates because essentially everyone is trying to get into this business. And you know, whereas like if you go somewhere that because I always say to people, if you're looking for work and you're willing to travel, find somewhere there's a high demand, low supply of people. So that way you come in, you're going to be appreciated. You're going to be able to call the shots a lot more. But if you have, you know, it's like a lot of movies you watch where someone goes for a job interview and there's a line going out the door of people going in for the same interview.
But the problem is that you're entering a sexy industry. Everything that's sexy just involves a lot of competition. I mean, go to LA and, you know, try to be a screenwriter, you know. Good luck. It's very sexy.
I had someone recently contact me because they moved to LA and they hadn't actually planned where they wanted to live or what they wanted to do. They just kind of showed up here and then, you know, suddenly they couldn't get work. And they were risking being homeless at that point. It was a really messed up situation. And the thing is that rather than saying like, man, I feel really bad for you, I had to level with him and say like, dude, like you got to think this stuff through. You can't just like get on a bus like every actress and actor out here and say, I'm going to LA to be famous and not actually make plans, you know. So same thing, like you come out here, you have a job offer waiting for you. And and the thing is like, I know plenty of people who say, well, you know, especially in LA, you need to be here, otherwise they won't talk to you. The thing is that you can tell them that you're here, and then if you get a job interview, fly out for it if that's what you need to do.
Hmm.
But for you just to
Well,
show up
get
and
them to pay for that
yeah,
flight. Even
exactly.
better.
But like either way, you have a plan. Like you know, you can't do anything in life without having some kind of plan figured out. And obviously,
No.
you roll with the punches, you adapt. But if you just show up and expect things to go how you imagined without really doing your planning, your research, then you know when shit hits the fan, like you've got to have a plan for that too. And I've like most of the successful people I know who did come out here without having work lined up, what they did have was a plan of if it fails, like after this amount of time, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back
Yeah.
home or I'm going to do this. So, you know, at least they're planning for the worst case scenario. And
You
if
need a fallback plan, definitely.
exactly.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you come out here, you drain all your money, and you know, like that's what I hate. But like LA, you know, you get everyone who comes out here wanting to be discovered, and visual
Hmm.
effects is so different to that. But when you have that ignorance of expecting to you know walk out here and become like you know live the dream, it's a very ignorant way of looking at life, and you really need to be a realist about it. And I get this a lot from my girlfriend, who will kind of look at me about like I will always plan for the worst. You know, the best thing that could happen to me, I'm still gonna think about like, okay, well, fuck, if it all falls apart, this is how I'm gonna approach it. And it isn't because I'm looking at things in a negative way and being a pessimist. It's more to do with like I want to always be prepared for worst case, and if the best case happens, awesome. But I still want to be prepared, so it's not a shock when you know things start to unravel or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, you need to hedge, pretty
Yeah,
much. It's a
exactly,
hedging strategy. It's just insurance. You insure yourself for the worst case.
absolutely.
And this is absolutely smart. I mean, for example, I mean, what happens in the visual effects industry right now to the students who go into school and pile up all this debt, and then they step into in an industry where they don't know if they even will get the jobs. It's kind of like if I compare it to a screenwriter who went to school and accumulates an $80,000 debt, and then he goes to LA and becomes the next big screenwriter. It's
Hmm.
the same situation. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a huge gamble, and it's not a small one. It's a gamble on your life,
It's a
your money,
huge
everything.
one. It's a huge one, and don't forget the opportunity cost
Hmm.
of $80,000. If that's your student loan, imagine the time you could have spent it to actually make money. You don't have you spend it 2 years of your life in a school to learn these skills, and then they're not of use anymore in any other industry. At least a lawyer can use the skills somewhere else, but
I just want to say, like, I really appreciate your time, and I want to thank you for giving out a lot of your valuable time on this. It's been really awesome. So, at this point, like, where would people go to find out more about your book?
thank you for having me, Alan. People can find out more on my webpage, which is www.insidevfx.com. And yeah, there you just find everything about the book and some of my work if you care to see.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Pierre. I'll wrap this up, but it's been so great. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me. It was a blast. And yeah, it was great speaking to you.
So I just want to thank Pierre for coming on to do this interview. I had a blast. It was very insightful for me to get access to him, to have a lot of this information to discuss his book and to go through some of the most controversial material to do with visual effects, especially right now in such a adapting and vulnerable industry. Now, a lot of what we discuss obviously is more our opinion, but at the same time, like I usually do avoid these subjects just because I like to focus on the positive end. And one thing I really want to get across is that Pierre's book is not about bashing the industry or throwing your hands up in the air and saying that we're all doomed at all. What it is a chance to look back at the industry, taking like a snapshot, to use his words, of the past, the history of visual effects, and to be able to look at it more analytically to discover where things have changed over time, as well as what we're going through right now. The whole idea of this is more to educate a lot of us into what we're doing and also to adapt to the situations that we're in. Now, just like with any industry, things change over time, and the ones that do adapt are the ones that do succeed. So use the information that you get from his book as well as from this episode to be able to make clear decisions as to what you want to do and how you want to move forward. For me, I love to read, I love to gain more information and more insight. just to formulate my own opinions. It doesn't mean that I need to follow everything that I hear, but it does allow me to be able to make more educated decisions as to how I want to move forward. Now, I mentioned examples in this episode about how, let's say, the publishing industry needing to change to adapt to how things are doing, more online publishing and self-publishing. So Barnes & Noble being one example of how they would try and fight it and boycott books to try and set an example, and how that really isn't the best way to go about adapting to change. And the same deal with music. Obviously, Capitol Records is a great example of this, whereas iTunes is a company that was able to look at it and embrace change, to look at a situation, analyze the situation, and find ways to make it benefit them and work out better for them. So I always say that rather than fighting what is going to happen, rather than fighting change, why not educate yourself on it so that way you can find ways to adapt and to evolve. So I always think that it's best to look at any situation as a positive thing, but also to educate yourself on it. Now, that's why I wanted to discuss Pierre's book. That's why I was in a rush to pick it up, because it's a chance to really educate ourselves about something that there is so much hearsay all over the internet without really much education or examples, ways to kind of really look at it and be presented in a way that we can really understand things a lot better. So I do urge you, whether you're in visual effects or just interested in the subject, to check it out, because it does affect everyone, and obviously a lot of the information we're fed otherwise is quite vague. So I found it to be a really awesome read. Now, all that being said, again, thanks to Pierre for coming on, and I hope everyone enjoyed that. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to start putting out episodes every Monday, 6 a.m. Pacific time. So Los Angeles time, I will be releasing episodes every Monday. And so you can expect that to be the new time that all future episodes are coming out. I have an amazing set of interviews as well as solo episodes coming up. In fact, things are so busy right now. It's so awesome. I've got a lot of really big names, a lot of really amazing people that I'm excited to bring on coming on over the next few weeks. So make sure to check out the next few episodes. And in the meantime, I would love to get everyone's take on this. Obviously, it can be a bit of a controversial subject, so I always say be respectful of others, but be cool, respectful, and make sure everything you say is constructive and try and add to the conversation. So leave a comment on my blog. You can check out the show notes. This is also something I'll be doing moving forward as well, is actually having show notes. I'm going to be putting out a lot of information, so links to Pierre's book as well as other information, his reel, where to contact him, as well as anything else we've talked about, like James Altucher's book, a couple other things. If you go to http://www.allanmckay.com, so ALLANMCKAY.com/20, the number 20 for episode 20. And you can check out the show notes there, as well as leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. I read all the comments. I do my best to reply, and I will definitely share my opinions and views as well. But I'd love to hear from you, and thank you again for listening.